Okay, so today is the postmodern. Today brings the story up to today, to where we are in many ways. I also, for the purposes of kind of fitting into the structure of the reading, and a more or less equal or proportionate division of reading across the four classes up to this one. We're also doing Romanticism today, but Romanticism has a special relationship to the postmodern too. So it's appropriate that it's in the today's mix. Now, looking back at our unfolding narrative here, we basically have been seeing in this huge process of moving from the embedded self in an animistic world that tended to be more local and tribal, but very in touch with the whole in that way that we recognize so readily in indigenous traditional cultures, and relatively undifferentiated in relationship to the divine, like through ritual, for example, in relationship to the tribal community for the individual, in relationship to the rest of nature, animals, plants, water, air. In all these respects, it's an embedded participation mystique, okay? And the overall process, we could say, has been one of very gradual, if you look at it over the millennia, hundreds of thousands of years really at work prior to getting to the Axial period. And then the Axial period approximately 2.5 millennia ago. And then the modern really taking off exactly a half millennium ago. And then the postmodern really emerging in this last century. And especially articulately in our lifetime, or at least in some of our lifetimes. Some of you were born right into it in full expression, because it was becoming very self-aware, particularly in academia in the 1980s. Okay, so the overall process we could describe as one of gradual but increasingly rapid and powerful differentiation and individuation. First in individuation in the conventional sense of, moving the individual out of the collective, out of the matrix in any sense, out of the tribe, out of the crowd, and also moving the human out of the community of species. But I also am gesturing with that word individuation to Jung's understanding of individuation, which is not the conventional one, because for him, truly becoming an individual, individuation involves not only separating yourself out from the collective unconscious, where it's and the collective consciousness, which is kind of shaping everybody in an unconscious way until you begin to individuate and become conscious. He's not only talking about that, he's also talking about going through such a powerful transformative process that one gets in touch with the whole again, that you reground yourself in the archetypal ground of psyche, and ultimately in his later work of the world of the ensouled world. So that, and the way you can think of that form of individuation is, that is Jung's sense, is actually pretty close to, in a step psychological way, to what Brian Swim is talking about when he talks about how we human beings are the earth or the cosmos in human form. We aren't just like on the planet, we are the planet in this form. And Jung's notion of the individual is that we achieve, and it's a never-ceasing process. We achieve our individuality by becoming, in some sense, as fully us as an individual, but grounded in the soil of the whole, in the same way that the oak tree has become an oak, and the blue whale has become the whale, and the mosquito has become the mosquito. It is the cosmos in that form. It's individuated. This is a total aside from the history of Western thought, but Rudolf Steiner posits the idea, or discerns the idea, that every individual human is, in a sense, as much its own species as every species is of the rest of the animal kingdom. That there's a greater compression of individualism, even getting to the point of being one's own species. I think. Clearly, those of you who have very close relationships with animals recognize that there's an individuality in the animal as well. But you can, I think we can also see something of what Steiner is gesturing at with that statement, and I think it has something to do with has a great deal to do with the long evolutionary process of forging autonomy, which is what this is all about. All right, now, I've described this as a process of gradual differentiation of, this is like, again, this is both the individual out of the collective, out of the tribe. This is also the human species out of the rest of the life community. This is also the egoic rational consciousness out of psyche. It's like the Cartesian self, separated from, and in some sense, like differentiated from, but in some sense hierarchically over and against the unconscious, as well as over and against the external world, the objective world of matter. So in all these respects, this has been a differentiation, and because of the nature of the relocation of soul, spirit, meaning, purpose, value, and subjectivity itself in the human, there's been that relocation has erased the larger global ground of meaning, and so in that sense the differentiation is accompanied by increasing dissociation in the modern period above all, and a dissociation and alienation and inflation, which you can obviously see if you're the only intelligent, conscious being around with a sense of what's good, sense of spiritual, moral, aesthetic value, a sense of self-awareness, and you just see everything around you as being radically inferior to you in that respect, you're going to get kind of cocky. And then if you magnify that, universalize that to the whole cosmos, I mean, you've become the summum bonum. You've become the highest form of conscious intelligence known in the universe, and so it's, as I think I said maybe in the first week, it's kind of like a vacuum cleaner has inhaled the entire anima mundi of the cosmos, the soul of the world, of the whole cosmos, put it inside, and there's cartoons about something like that, and then just getting so magnified and huge and inflated and top heavy. And in a sense, that top heaviness is exactly what creaked and started to destabilize and deconstruct 100 years ago, make that 120 some years ago, with you see it in depth psychology and Nietzsche and Freud and Jung and Anna O and Tony Wolff, Sabina Spielrein. They're taking in the fact that the ego can't hold it all together, and the pathology of that, the return of the repressed, starts taking place, and that's the crucial move in psyche towards the postmodern. But that's getting our ahead of our story a bit. And when I mention the differentiation, the dissociation, also it's accompanied by a neutralization of the cosmos, of the world. That's Charles Taylor's term. I'm not sure if we talked about that last time. It's another word for objectification, which is another word for disenchantment, like removing the soul out of the interior subject, out of the objective world. Like, I'm a subject. Those lambs, those cattle, those trees, that once sacred mountain, those are just objects, commodities for human self-enhancement, etc. Just a quick allusion to that intermediate place here, because I want to mention that intermediate place between these. So everybody recognizes we're talking about, here's the primal. I call it the primal. You could call it the tribal, the primitive, the very, very ancient, and still present in so many ways. And then we could call this the axial, to use the term that's most currently used now, or historical religious, first millennium BCE. And then here is the modern, and then here is the postmodern. And it kind of neatly fits into our four classes so far. And if we could just fill out that picture with this crucial intermediate, this should be just as big as these, but I just want to fit it in here as a footnote. But it's a footnote that lasted thousands of years, longer than our modern era, and that is the great Archaic period, which I'll just symbolize with a pyramid, since Egypt is such a absolutely paradigmatic example of it, but Mesopotamia is as well. The Aztecs in the Western Hemisphere, where you have this hierarchical compression and elevation of divinity. It's an elevation of divinity into more sky gods, into a more systematic pantheon, but it's identified with the highest power, political, social power in these new civilizations. This is all characteristic of civilization, early civilizations, right? Mesopotamia, Egypt, early China, India, and Aztec, etc. Robert Bellah argues that even Hawaii is before contact is getting to that point. And you have the divine is kind of identified with the pharaoh, the emperor, the divine king, who alone becomes the conduit for the human contact with the divine, and he holds that in ritual, and sacrifices are made both to the gods, or the god, and the king, the pharaoh, the emperor, and so that serves as a, with the arrival of complex civilizations with their hierarchical social structures, we see this, the totally compact cosmology, this is Vogelin's term, of the primal has taken a new form, coming out of, in a way, like alpha males and up in the primates, or coming out of upstarts in the tribal situation, which were held down by the egalitarianism of the tribe. It breaks through in a more complex civilization. You've got more food. The agricultural revolution has taken place. You're organizing things. You've got a bureaucracy. You've got military defenses to defend what you've got and to expand it. Empire comes in, and this gets a whole shift in the divine takes place that is connected to the shift in the sociological situation. And towards the end of, in Egypt, you get this great moment in Akhenaten where he experiences and posits, proclaims one God above all other gods, and one God alone should be worshipped, and that's the sun god, who he identifies with and who he is the exclusive conduit for. And that is a that's a pharaoh in Egypt, and it's Akhenaten, A-K, well, remember this is a transliteration in English, A-K-H-E-N A-T-E-N, Akhenaten. That's like a preview of what's to come. And then in the axial period, this elevation and differentiation of the divine just breaks through to a universal, transcendent divine that's accessible to every individual instead of just that one individual. See, it's gone from the many or the whole tribe to the one, and now the divinity gets compressed more, and then it gets totally. It's the one God, the monotheism of Judaism, or there's essentially a kind of monotheism in the Platonic tradition, the supreme divine reason, the one in Neoplatonism, Brahman, and the like. And so you have, but it's now become accessible to every, potentially in a more democratized way, but at first only to the philosopher in Greece, right, like the Platonic philosopher, Pythagoras, etc., to the mystic in India, the sage in China, and of course the prophet in Israel. These axial, what's the right word? They are individuals. They are carrying, in a sense, the future of individuality. In a sense, you can see that they are carrying forward the shaman, right? The shaman was the individual in the primal form, primal form of human consciousness, and then this takes a whole nother form in the axial period with the great religious awakenings across the globe. Bella makes the point, again, this is Robert Bella, sociologist of religion. Religion and Human Evolution is his recent book. Bella makes the very helpful point that just as the king or the pharaoh is like, or the king in Hawaii, Kamehameha, for example, they were essentially upstarts in a certain way, if you look at it from the primal tribal situation, which thrived on keeping the alpha male upstart under control by ganging up on him and suppressing, or through moral judgment and expulsion, etc. They kept that from happening so that there would be that egalitarianism. And Bella makes the point that in a way, not only is the Pharaoh or the emperor, the divine king, in all these, in Israel, Saul, David, not only are these upstarts, but so also is the prophet an upstart. The prophet also is an upstart, but he is an upstart who is in relationship to the divine, has this direct relationship to the divine, and is critiquing critiquing the conventional political social structure and its claims to exclusive connection to the divine and representation of the divine, or even divine status, all right? And in Israel in particular, history breaks in. It like the arrow of history starts coming in. Instead of this much more, the cyclical, the timeless, or that quality of every when, beautiful word from the Australian Aboriginal anthropology, every when. Instead of that notion, with Israel, God's got a plan that's moving through history, and it's going to climax in a transformation of humanity that is, radical and powerful. And this arrow of history, rather than the eternal cycles, the eternal return, it is a divine movement towards redemptive transformation. This gets really amped up with new dimensions in Christianity that kind of, in many ways, outgrowth of Judaism, though it's not only that. And this leads to both an individual, intimate relationship with the personal divine, but it's also faith in an unfolding divine destiny for all of humankind. That becomes very, very prominent. And I mentioned what kind of leverage this gives for changing the powers that be. If you've got a direct connection to a universal source of value, the highest locus of supreme value, if you've got access to it, then you can judge, as I mentioned before, you can say, yes, you're the powerful king, but I know that there is a king of kings, and that king of kings relativizes your claims to sovereign power. And this is true also of the notion of justice and the good and moral concerns. You see this with, just the other day, there's a new book on how different cultures, different races have pictured, in iconography, have pictured Jesus Christ, and how African Americans, the image of Christ would often have would be a man of color. Well, of course, the Europeans turn into not only white, but often like blue-eyed, a blue-eyed Aryan, one's making the God in one's own image. And I bring this up because in this very good interview with the author of this, he pointed out that for how emancipatory it was for the African American slaves in the American colonies and then in the early United States, to be able to say to themselves, they couldn't say it to the outside, but to each other and to themselves, they could say, yes, I've got a master here that's enslaving me, but Jesus Christ is a master of masters, and that totally relativizes the claims to power over my being that this slave master exerts, and it gives leverage, as it did for the whole population of the United States, of those fighting against slavery, as the Civil War eventually became. It gives leverage for for the transformation of injustice that is not possible when you're in this situation, or even in the archaic situation where divinity, moral value is ultimately allied with established political social power. All right. So this is the great breakthrough of the Axial. I wanted to play for you last time, but we didn't have a good sound system, so I just went out and got one of my own. Two quick. Remember how I said Nietzsche in one of his witty put downs of Christianity. He said, they'd have to look more redeemed for me to believe in their Redeemer. They'd have to sing better songs, and you can understand where he's coming from in some respects if you don't go back to whatever Bach and many other, absolutely, Beethoven, many other great sacred Christian compositions. But in our own past century, that was perhaps carried, and you get a more direct connection to what infused the sense of the Christian relationship to a saving deity that inspired so many people right up to Martin Luther King from the ancient Hebrew prophets. You get it in the African American spirituals. That music carries it much more. I'm just going to give you a very contemporary version. This is recorded just over here back in the mid-1970s by Ry Cooder with the great African American singers Terry Evans and Bobby King. And this is Jesus on the Main Line. Okay, so there you get that sense of that kind of new, direct, personal intimacy with the divine that is very much part of primitive Christianity. That phrase, primitive Christianity, comes from the academic literature. It's talking about the very earliest, like where the Pentecostal moment, that right after Jesus died, the first generations that were really carrying it. There's this direct personal intimacy with the divine in a very personal form, and it reemerged in the Protestant Reformation. In evangelicalism here in the U.S., it's a huge continued experiential reality. And in the African American experience of a saving divinity, you can hear in a song like that, which is it's a black spiritual from, I think, the 40s or 50s. You can hear that intimate connection with an invisible dimension of existence that was felt clearly in the primal and tribal periods, but and it's carried by music, which is that ritual form that particularly you access the emotional, non-verbal dimension that gives the verbal more meaning. When you listen to music, lyrics are important, but a lot of times really great music, the lyric is almost like forgettable, or the lyric can be almost like nonsensical or not quite coherent. But if the music is conveying something that is past that. But unlike the tribal, ritual, music, dancing, becoming one with divinity, which is still in like a revival. If you see, I remember when I was a teenager, I went to a powerful revival just as part of a high school, kind of sociological project of, and it was thousands of people in this huge tent in Michigan, and the dancing and the state of possession, the glossolalia, the speaking in tongues that was happening spontaneously, and they were moving. I watched a woman that, who had to be in her 70s, going more, moving like right up the aisle in this kind of frenetically electric, vibrating through her whole body, dancing intensely, as intensely as any, person at a rave with a double dose of ecstasy and amphetamines. It was just, pure possession state is coming through. So you're still getting that. You're drawing on that richness and experiential power of, Paleolithic, primal religious experience. But here it's with this new sense of the axial religious transcendence and liberation, salvation. See, salvation is not an issue for the primal situation. It's only with here that it's like you want it. You're transcending this world of sorrow, the valley of sorrows, or you'll be saved from it, or life in the afterlife is where the real meaning is, heaven or hell, or it's nirvana, or it's some form of transcendence from the empirical world. That's what becomes important in the axial. I'll give you one other quick song, which I started to play last time, but I wasn't able to get it going on the system here. And this is a song written by an African American, Curtis Mayfield. So here you still find that sense of intimacy, of saving divine presence, but it's also here got more of a collective. It's the whole divine train of history is coming. People get ready. In a way, he's reflecting, of course, the 60s sense of a kind of collective historical quantum leap that's taking place. Civil rights movement, of course, is at its peak when he composes this song. But it's also carrying that sense of that's so crucial to the Christian perspective, religious perspective of the idea of grace. You don't need no ticket, you just get on board. Or you don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. It's not like, okay, have I done all the right have I done all the right things? Have I checked off all the boxes? Have I earned my way to salvation? It goes back to like St. Paul in particular, but Luther is the guy who breaks out of the church and says it's just we human beings cannot we depend on the divine to make this transformation. Something bigger than us has to do the transformation. We can't. It's not a marketplace. We just can't earn our way to spiritual transformation. It's something that happens by an act of divine grace, and that's very much carried by this, by that song, and that sense of the train a coming also really is carried right all the way through to like Martin Luther King, when which goes back to the prophetic tradition. When King is in Washington in 1963 and says that justice is going to pour down like mighty waters from the mountain, and the crooked will be made straight, and all God's children. I mean, he's just he's in this state of carrying that the train is coming, and that train is a train of freedom. Thank God at last. Thank God at last. Thank God. Free at last. Free at last. When you think about the three greatest speeches of American history, King's speech in Washington, and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and Lincoln's second inaugural address, which he did just before he died. Each of these speeches, two of them very, one of them totally carrying the African American right out of the African American church, and Lincoln, who was calling on a relationship to a divinity that he had. He was not a church guy, and he had pulled in and absorbed the modern doubts, skepticism in a deep way, and at the same time he was finding a certain relationship to this divine acting in history that was moving with inscrutable force that he felt he was serving in a way that was both radically imperfect, and yet he could see that even death itself, his own death and the death of thousands, was serving something bigger, and that was that sacrifice on the larger altar of a higher spiritual value that goes right back to this axial revelation in Israel, in Isaiah and Amos and Ezekiel and Jeremiah. How many here are not in PCC? Okay, I'll just mention a quick thing that I sent out to the PCC chat, and that is I'm sure you don't need any encouragement for me to go see the film Lincoln that just came out, that has Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln, and Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, probably the greatest play of the last 20 years. He wrote the screenplay. Took many years to do this, and Steven Spielberg directed it. And it's based on Doris Kearns, sort of like these geniuses. It just something worked, something magic happened, and Daniel Day-Lewis in particular he studied Lincoln so carefully in the biographies, and he has such empathic genius for entering into or being entered into by another identity that he is focused on, not moving out of character, day after day. That it's like Lincoln is on the screen. It's a very uncanny and kind of transpersonal achievement, but it's not just a great, theatrical or cinematic achievement in that sense. It also is like this kind of moral illumination of our present as well as past, in the shadow of our history, the nobility of it, the messiness of democracy. It's all there. It's a very powerful play. But this idea of the leverage that having a connection to a transcendent divine source of ultimate good and justice gives you to change an unjust world, it shoots through in the Enlightenment right into the founding of America. Benjamin Franklin, who was as key a person as anybody in forging the American experiment, along with Jefferson and Madison and Washington and the rest, John Adams. He wanted the motto of the United States to be rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God. You see how that perfectly describes it's simultaneously, it's a connection to the divine, to God, etc., but it empowers rebellion against the tyrant, against the old king, the divine king, the pharaoh, whatever, against oppression of any kind. And that's carried through into, it's on the streets now in Egypt. Well, Ben Franklin. Yeah, although Franklin, it's been identified with Ben Franklin for a long time, but recent research, and Jefferson also at least seconded that idea and said it, but I've seen evidence that there was a guy named John Bradshaw that was a 17th century British rebel in the Puritan Revolution, or what's called the Great Rebellion, which was kind of the British version of the French Revolution in the 1640s, who played a role in the trial and execution of Charles, King Charles of England in the mid-1700s. That he had that on his epitaph, the John Bradshaw. So if that's the case, then Franklin was alluding back to that, just as when Martin Luther King, who's most famously identified with that, or is very famously identified with that statement that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, slowly bends towards justice, and that's identified with King. We've heard Obama say it more than once. That was actually first said by a transcendentalist, whose name I'm blocking right now, but back in the mid-19th century. So emotionally, in the background of modernity, you've got this modern individual sense of sacred self-worth that goes back to the axial religious blessing, as it were. We say human rights are sacred human rights. See, there's nothing in a disenchanted universe that gives you license to talk about something being sacred. That's where the mortgage to the past is still there, or the legacy from the past, from the religion that carried the civilization forward prior to the modern Enlightenment is still there when we talk about sacred human rights. The nobility of the individual soul, and that sense of moving forward in God's plan through history towards a positive outcome, that gets translated in the Enlightenment to the sense of modern progress. Okay, but then there's the shadow side of all this, and that's what starts really emerging as we get to the postmodern. The shadows of the modern starts to become clear. Oh, I mentioned one thing that I didn't follow up on. Remember I said I wanted to have that intermediate. I want to show this intermediate too. This would be, I wish I was an artist, but let's have like a kind of telescope. That's the Copernican revolution. Galileo's, it's Kepler saying, I'm writing this now for posterity to read, whether it takes a century for a reader, it doesn't matter. It's taken 6,000 years for God to illuminate my mind, for us to see the cosmos as it is. The scientific revolution gave the modern self a sense that it was getting a God's eye view, basically, of the cosmos, as never before. One could also have here, though, so there was this numinous sense of kind of coming into the human being, which I tried to convey with that painting from the same period as Copernicus, Michelangelo's painting of God touching Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. There's that contact is made. The divine, there's like a kind of incarnational process whereby the divine is being introjected into, and the transcendent is being introjected, and the human being identifies with the solar logos in Platonic terms. It identifies with the sun rather than the earth. The earth is no longer a center, but the modern mind feels that it is a center because it's got reason that can, like a center of the cosmos, shine its light everywhere and illuminate it and understand it, okay, with objectivity, and see a universal truth, an objective truth. You see how it's essentially interjected a God's eye view. At first with a sense of participation and grace and blessing with the divine. Later, God dies, and there's much more sense, well, we don't need God as a hypothesis. It's not necessary. And I think there's actually a kind of shift in the consciousness, the vision, the sense of a hovering divine presence has moved away, and there's much more of a sense of the light of common day, kind of objective truth, and this world becomes much more important rather than the next world, and we don't devalue this world in order to go to the next world. Now, I want to make reference to you could also have, besides the telescope, you could also have like Michelangelo's paintbrush. You could have Martin Luther's hammer. I'd love to know if any research has been done what kind of hammer he used to put the 95 Theses, nail them to the church door. But it probably didn't look like a one that you pick up today at Home Depot. But that also is there's a download of it's like, no, the individual now has the direct relationship to the divine. It doesn't need the church. It doesn't need priests. It doesn't need intercessions. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, Luther, much like Descartes in philosophy, Luther in religion experiences a breaking out of the medieval matrix, and in that encounter with profound doubt in the case of Descartes, and profound religious doubt and crisis in Luther's case, he comes out of it with a sense of individual self-responsibility before the divine that is a foundation for the modern self that we all, Protestant or not, in this room, carry. So one could use multiple symbols there. Now there's that masculine-feminine dimension to all this as well, which I summarized with that when I mentioned that whole thing about the Billy Graham thing. I think that time Billy Graham said, if we don't have faith in God the Father, we are entirely at the mercy of Mother Nature. And what he's doing there in that particular statement, he's representing that the fact that this has largely been done through masculine symbolizations of the divine and of the human relationship to the divine that kind of forward this differentiation out of the matrix of an ensouled nature. I'm looking for one particular. Let's see if I can. Jumps out at me. Maybe this is where it is. All right, well, that's all right. So, and it's simultaneously, it's the dualism that reflects this axial period of spirit over matter, of the eternal over time, of God over nature, and this gender dimension to it, all of which gets kind of hyper empowered in the Christian period, and then translates to modern science and its sense of being that mind-body separation, that subject-object separation, which is a new form of spirit-matter separation, and this unconscious identification with God. Here I'm going to draw on my old friend and teacher, Gregory Bateson, from Esalen days, where he, in a book called Steps to an Ecology of Mind, he said, if you put God outside and set him vis-a-vis his creation, and if you have the idea that you are created in his image, you will logically and naturally see yourself as outside and against the things around you. And as you arrogate all mind to yourself, the way I've talked about it is like appropriating the whole soul of the world to yourself. If you arrogate all mind to yourself, you will see the world around you as mindless and soulless, I add, and therefore as not entitled to moral or ethical consideration. The environment will be yours to exploit. If this is your estimate of your relation to nature, and you have an advanced technology, and that's the key, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. You will die either of the toxic byproducts of your own hate or simply of overpopulation and overgrazing. So that's Gregory Bateson back in 1972. And yeah, that's from Steps to an Ecology of Mind, page 462. So if you combine that with Jung's and Hillman's emphasis that not so much on mind and nature, but that we are in psyche. The psyche's not in us. We are in psyche. There are patterns of meaning within which our life is meaningful. We live within a living matrix of meaning, the anima mundi, going back to this period. And so compared with Bateson's idea that more we live within patterns of information. Mind isn't just in here, it's out, but it's out there in the ecological sense. But if we kind of radicalize that, expand that to the idea that the larger psyche and anima mundi, mind is encompassing not just patterns of information, but patterns of meaning and patterns and numinosity itself, the sacred. That crucially introduces and integrates the symbolic and archetypal dimensions of the cosmos. By the way, if you're interested in exploring this, the person who especially grasped the relationship of the problematic relationship of the Judaic and Christian, he particularly is focusing on Christian, biblical tradition to our ecological crisis. It was a man named Lynn White who in 1967 wrote a little essay called the historical roots of our ecologic crisis. That's how he put it. I refer to it there in the chronology of at the back of Passion of the Western Mind. Okay. All right. Now I want to say a few words about Romanticism, and then we'll take our break. And then when we come back, I want to show you a couple of film clips that will illuminate what we've been talking about. Romanticism can be seen as, at one level, it's this kind of antithesis that emerges as a counterpoint to the rationalist Enlightenment. Okay, in every respect, Romanticism counters certain tendencies of the Enlightenment. It, in relationship to the human cognitive capacity, instead of only a certain kind of sensory empiricism and a narrow form of rationalism, Romanticism affirms the whole panoply of cognitive potential faculties, the imagination above all, but also emotion, intuition, the somatic, and in relationship to nature, instead of seeing it as a disenchanted object, it is seen as a numinous matrix within which we exist. Listen to Goethe here from his prose hymn called Nature. Nature, we are surrounded and enveloped by her, incapable of leaving her domain. She draws us into the rounds of her dance, neither asking nor warning, and she whirls away with us until we fall exhausted from her arms. All human beings are in her, and she is in them. Even the most unnatural is nature. Even the clumsiest pedantry has something of her genius. We obey her laws even when we resist them. We are working with her even when we mean to work against her. Nature is everything. She rewards and punishes, delights and tortures herself. She has placed me into life. She will also lead me out of it. I trust myself into her care. She has placed me into life. She may hold sway over me. She will not hate her work. It was not I who spoke of her. No, it was nature who spoke it all, true and false. Nature is the blame for all things. Hers is the merit. And then this passage that I'm about to read from Goethe captures the participatory. That one is more the sense of being almost like immersed in the great mother goddess of nature, just like total embeddedness. This next one has another inflection to this romantic sentiment. By romantic, again, capital R, I capitalize Romanticism in passion to distinguish it from the romance of falling in love, even though Romanticism does involve a certain falling in love, but not in the I want to hold your hand sense. Oh, this is great. I forgot about that. I think we can turn this off. So this is Goethe from his essay on Winckelmann. When the sound and wholesome nature of the human acts as an entirety, he puts it in the masculine way, which is typical. Romanticism is still, to a great extent, carrying patriarchy, but it is also breaking free in certain crucial respects. In its, even though in its sensibility it is so more embracing of what are sometimes called the feminine dimensions of human sensibility, I would call, well, that's a whole other issue which we have referred to before. I don't want to go into it right now. And even though in relationship to the divine, Romanticism moves out of the monotheistic patriarch to a much more complexified view of the divine as being not just a transcendent monotheist, but there's movement towards pantheism, towards polytheism, towards the feminine dimension of the divine, the panentheistic, and so forth. But still, there is a patriarchy at work in Romanticism in the later 18th, 19th century. Not across the board, not with every single person, but it's still certainly there. You can also in the behavior. When the sound and wholesome nature of man acts as an entirety, when he feels himself in the world as in a grand, beautiful, worthy, and worthwhile whole, when this harmonious comfort affords him a pure, untrammeled delight, then the universe, if it could be sensible of itself, would shout for joy at having attained its goal and wonder at the pinnacle of its own essence and evolution. For what end is served by all the expenditure of suns and planets and moons, of stars and Milky Ways, of comets and nebulae, of worlds evolving and passing away, if at last a happy human person does not involuntarily rejoice in his existence? Okay, now you can see it's not quite getting to the participatory view where you are where we wouldn't say if the universe could be sensible of itself. The universe is sensible of itself, and it's sensible of itself in numerous ways, including that moment of the human being feeling joy and wonder at life and at the cosmos. And this is a point that that Brian Swim carries so beautifully in his cosmological work. In relationship to the kind of what's called the Cartesian Enlightenment, which John Locke carries, and the philosophes in France, not Rousseau, but the rest of them, it basically reframes it overcomes that tendency towards the disenchantment of nature. You see it rejected very strongly by William Blake, by Wordsworth. It mourns that, at the same time it mourns that disenchantment because it's feeling the impact on it. Here's, let me see if I think I've got with me the, here's Wordsworth. That absolutely paradigmatic poem, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood, where he's capturing the numinous vision of the child's consciousness and how it is in a state of primal participation mystique. He puts it in somewhat Platonic terms as well. But he's also mourning the consequences of modernity and the modern adult consciousness. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look round her when the heavens are bare. Waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth. But yet I know, where'er I go, that there hath passed a glory from the earth. And you really feel the romantic poignancy. And then he this famous something is gone, the flower at my feet does the same tale repeat. Where is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? This famous passage, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. Boy, that's straight out of Plato. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Heaven, now here he basically describes this whole trajectory as well as the individual human one. We're born trailing clouds of glory. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Remember how I talked about like the Greeks, it's as if heaven and earth had not been totally separated. They're in a numinous place. Certainly that's very true of the primal sensibility. But then he says, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, he's getting that western, always towards the west, as Nietzsche says, in the direction of the sun. The youth still is nature's priest as he travels, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended, but at length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. So he's captured the dark side of the Enlightenment, that the celestial light, the numinous, has somehow been eclipsed by this powerful bright light of modern reason. I think nobody carried that more powerfully in poetry, that sense of the what was at stake, than William Blake, who's like the poetic. He's got a biblical intensity, and he's got a poetic force, and he's not just talking about what he's sort of fantasizing. He's seeing them right. I mean, for him, he saw these beings right in front of him. The gods, the mythic beings, the spiritual drama. Here's William Blake. May God keep us from single vision and Newton's sleep. You see how like the single vision, that's the solar monotheistic, heroic, modern rationality, right? It's a one light, one eye. God save us from single vision and Newton's sleep. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. That's where doors of perception comes from. Of course, both the doors of perception from Aldous Huxley's book on psychedelics in the 50s, but also The Doors, Jim Morrison. This is where that comes from, William Blake. It's the marriage of heaven and hell. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. Or listen to this. Art degraded. He capitalized everything like art, imagination. Art degraded. Imagination denied. War governed the nations. So he sees those come together. Poetry fetters the human race. Nations are destroyed or flourish in proportion as their poetry, painting, and music are destroyed or flourish. That's carrying the great romantic affirmation of art, of beauty, and of the spiritual sensibility that transcends the narrow solar reason of the rationalist Enlightenment. But Romanticism also, while it reframes the rationalist Enlightenment and it recovers the sense of the importance of the interior, and in some ways it's bearing witness to the everything, while the modern Enlightenment is all about the modern. They will use previous ideas from the Greek period in order to push progress and intellectual comprehension further. But overall, the focus is the past was benighted. We're moving towards an ever brighter future through human reason, in the Industrial Revolution, individualistic democracy, the scientific revolution, technological prowess, and so forth. This is the way forward. By contrast, Romanticism has a whole different view of history. It sees primal, indigenous, traditional cultures as carrying something that we've forgotten, we've lost. There's a value. Herder said every cultural era is precious to God. That's very different than the modern perspective. Herder was same period as Goethe, and really was a kind of teacher of all the romantics that came after, and the German idealists. It harkens back to, as Wordsworth did, to the Axial revolution and the transcendent. There's a sense of transcendence as well as immanence of the divine. So it's in many ways contrasting itself to the Enlightenment, but it is also sustaining certain things that are part of the modern Enlightenment. It expands and sustains the Promethean impulse of freedom, right, of emancipation, new horizons opening up, brilliance, individualism. The cult of genius is huge, coming in Beethoven, for example. Just that sense of like what Beethoven was doing, or Goethe. It just gave a whole new sense of what was possible for the human being. The rebellion against conventions, constraints, that's very true of the Romantics as well as of the Enlightenment. So it's doing this kind of continuity with, but also rebellion against. And then what happens is, as Romanticism and the Enlightenment, which carry, in a sense, the sun and moon of the modern sensibility, move forward, they are affecting each other. And in a sense, because they open such different horizons to the human consciousness, they force modernity to have a more complex sensibility. They force us. They force the human being to be carrying a multiplicity of perspectives, and it relativizes that sense of the monotheist. Sorry, not only in a hidden way, monotheistic. It relativizes the monovision of the scientific objectivism that views itself as being sovereign, alone, above all other cultures, above all other ways of looking at things. And that helps push into possibility the postmodern, because it makes us think that maybe more than one truth is correct. At the same time, though, the power of the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, is having such an effect. Science is so successful, technology is so successful in remaking the world, in predicting the world, that more and more the Romantic is felt like basically stuck in it's got its interior world that Romanticism, the soul, rules, but the world that the soul is contextualized by is ruled by the Enlightenment. So it's sort of like the modern soul is here, the modern mind is ruling the big picture, and that relativizes the soul. It makes the modern condition one of feeling that one is essentially an isolated oddity of purposeful, meaning-seeking human consciousness in a universe that it has evolved out of and that it's embedded in, that is understood to be radically purposeless, meaningless, unconscious. And that contradiction, that profound incoherence is also behind the postmodern, and because it's sort of unsustainable. What I want you to carry of this idea of like the modern mind loyal to the Enlightenment of Descartes and John Locke and Newton and Bertrand Russell and Darwin and so forth, and the modern soul loyal to the Romantic tradition of Rousseau and Goethe and Coleridge and Blake and Emerson and Madame de Stael and Margaret Fuller, is that because they both have such potency, right in our universities, you've got the natural sciences, or natural and social sciences, and you've got the humanities. And those two, the sciences and the humanities, are like how to hold those. What it has done is to create a tension of opposites of the classic Jungian type, Hegelian, that has had to be held by the modernity. And it gets more and more intensified in the 20th century until it reaches a kind of breaking point. In a way, the breaking point can be seen as the 60s, and where postmodernity both really breaks into being in a lot of different ways, which we'll talk about when we come back. And I'll also say an unexpected intervention, as it were, happened with the psychedelic revolution. Because as soon as you start having this, interestingly, scientifically created chemical, LSD, the most powerful psychoactive substance known to human beings, taken by millions of people, affecting a whole generation and sequence of generations. It's sort of like Romanticism suddenly got a major shot in the arm, and relativized the claims to the single objective ownership of truth by the disenchanted vision of the modern Enlightenment. So that plays a crucial, it's a crucial role, and of course it also has the music going with it too. Music plays a huge role in the 60s and on. This school, of course, comes out of that period. 1968 it's founded, and we're all here because of that revolution. And in a way, this school is all about holding that tension of opposites. Whether we call it East and West, which is more how it was framed in the beginning, or Romanticism and the Enlightenment, or what I think the way I'd put it right now in a kind of general terms, that's also North and South, of course, but I would also put it just in academic terms, I would say it's rigor and imagination. That's our task, is to hold those two all the way through. All right, let's take our break, and when we come back, I'll show you a couple of videos, and then we'll unpack the postmodern more adequately. Thanks. So where we left off was basically one of the tension of opposites that Romanticism and the Enlightenment, which can be kind of pictured here, as it were, with the romantic soul estranged by the disenchanted cosmos that it finds itself in. And this sets in motion the whole, black is okay, descent into the postmodern, among many things, but above all, disenchantment is playing a crucial role. If you are living in a disenchanted universe, and you recognize no higher reality or any spiritual dimension that is intrinsic to this reality of the cosmos, then it's only so long before, in this vastly expanded cosmos, you start having a kind of implosion of disenchantment on the human subject itself. In other words, if everything is mechanistic and ultimately without intrinsic value, then that also speaks to the human being. That's carried very decisively by Richard Dawkins when he talks of us as throwaway robot vehicles of selfish genes. That's the kind of framing of the human project that's very distinctive. I mean, you get a whole sequence of famous 20th century scientists who describe almost with a kind of delight and vengeance in the dethroning of the human being, which I think has a noble dimension to it, which I'm going to discuss in detail or more adequately next time in our final class. But when Dawkins says something like, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Or Weinberg, where he says, this is Steven Weinberg, the great cosmologist, the end of his famous book, Summing Up Modern Cosmology, called The First 3 Minutes. In that final paragraph, he says, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more pointless it seems to be. Or then you get Primo Levi, the great Italian chemist and Holocaust survivor, who says, and this really captures the Copernican revolution as you recognize the consequences of the Copernican revolution. Not only are we, this is Primo Levi, not only are we not at the center of the cosmos, but we are alien to it. We are a singularity. The universe is strange to us. We are strange in the universe. Okay, very. Or then you get Jacques Monod, the great French biologist. Man must at last wake out of his dream and discover his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. He must realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world, a world that is deaf to his music and as indifferent to his hopes as it is to his sufferings or his crimes. Or elsewhere he says, the ancient covenant is in pieces. The ancient covenant, of course, that's biblical language. The covenant that the divine is paying attention to us, that we are made in the divine's image, that we have a divine destiny. That's gone. The ancient covenant is in pieces. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universe's unfeeling immensity, out of which he emerged only by chance. I gave a lecture on this particular with this particular thrust in the late modern mind, this kind of dethroning, which perhaps was it was Freud who kind of famously gave the sequence. He said, psychoanalysis is the third wounding blow to man's megalomania, narcissism, and self-love. The first blow was given by Copernicus in realizing that we're not the center of the cosmos. The second blow is given by Darwin when we realize that the Homo sapiens is not the center of, is not the divine special species of Genesis, but is just one more species and is ephemeral at that. And then psychoanalysis reveals that even the Cartesian egoic consciousness, that self, is but an epiphenomenon of the id. It's just, what's real is the broiling cauldron of the instincts of the whole Darwinian evolutionary process, and our sense of egoic consciousness is but a mere epiphenomenon, and it is not master of its own house. The unconscious is much more powerful. So this is dethroning that sense of being the robust Cartesian self, rationally comprehending the world, and sending it down. Excuse me. There's a here's Barbara Sullivan, a brilliant Jungian analyst here in the Bay Area, who captures this in the depth psychological tradition. Because, see, this isn't just the vast new spatial dimensions of us being like just, this infinitesimal speck in the inconceivably vast cosmos that's opened up in the last 100 years. It's also the opening, it's the sense of how vast is the, how vast is psyche that the tiny little consciousness has in relationship to it, and it's not this captain of destiny, of its own destiny, and and it doesn't have access to the objective reality that the modern scientific mind thought it did. This is the move that Kant particularly brought to modern philosophy when he brought a Copernican revolution, as you read, to philosophy. Instead of the what looks like an objective order of the sky moving night after night through the stars and the constellations and the planets, moving night after night through the heavens, what looks like an objective reality is in fact a function of our own movement, our own subjective order. That's the Copernican revolution. It's like the Earth is moving, and that's why it looks like everything else is moving. Huge. That's the ultimate act of reflexivity, the Copernican revolution. It's like you can't get much bigger than that, and that's like the moment of the postmodern in some respect, even as it's the moment of the modern. It has the seed of the postmodern dethronement. And Kant brings that to philosophy when he says what we think is the objective reality that we are seeing and understanding is in fact being constellated by our own subjectivity, because we're always seeing through our subjectivity and we're construing things by unconscious structures, cognitive, and then depth psychology opens it up to many other unconscious factors that are structuring our reality. And then anthropology radicalizes that by saying, okay, depending on what culture and society and era you live in, you're going to construct reality in totally different ways. And then feminism does this with saying, what gender you are is also going to shape how you construe reality. And patriarchy's had a lock on what's real. Well, we beg to differ. And multiculturalism and deep ecology, relativizing the human place in the ecological sphere. It's sort of like the hurricane superstorm Sandy just kind of like reminded New York City itself, the imperial capital of the world, like, whoa, I guess we need to take some other things into account here. So all of these involve a kind of dethronement and depth. I wanted to say that what Barbara Sullivan put, how she put it. She's a Jungian analyst, but for you psychologists, she's influenced by Bion in particular. And she says, now we live in the world of Virginia Woolf. I am a verb rather than a noun, always confronting an unconscious reality that disorients us. We lie to ourselves over and over in ways that affect us and that we can't control or compensate for. We have no direct experience of reality. That's Kant. It's all emotionally, psychically mediated and distorted. Thus the ubiquity of conflicting memories between two people. Reality can't be pinned down. You see how the old confidence about knowing reality has been systematically undermined by all these revolutions. And Thomas Kuhn is the one who brings that revolution particularly to the understanding of science's place in the whole scheme of things more decisively than anybody. He plays the key role in getting everybody to start thinking about that we're always seeing through paradigms, and even scientists are seeing through paradigms. And paradigms are not simply established on the basis of increasingly accurate and greater amounts of data. The data themselves are being constellated and constituted by our own assumptions as we approach the world. And that what is actually deciding what is scientific truth is to a crucial extent being shaped by sociological factors, like who's running, who allows things to be published in the peer-reviewed journals, who appoints the next professor of this in this department. It's a much more dicey relative operation, and I mentioned last time, Evelyn Fox Keller is the one who brings Kuhn's insight brings the feminist insight to the Kuhnian insight. And I mentioned her book, I think I said, on gender and science. The full title, actually, I remembered after class, was Reflections on Gender and Science. A really brilliant book worth owning, little Yale University Press, Reflections on Gender and Science. So the person who basically, I think, maybe I've got one more example of this dethronement that's so kind of contemporary because it's drawing on neuroscience as well. The other day I was hearing a few months ago, a neuroscientist philosopher was being interviewed on NPR, and he said, "We are stories being told by electrical signals in our brains creating the illusion of the Cartesian theater. Okay? So now do you see how that's the implosion of the a construct of these material processes that are random. Of course, the neuroscientist seems to be temporarily forgetting that he too is telling a story, and that he's weaving a narrative in which electrical signals in our brain create the illusion of creates the illusion of our identities, which makes you wonder how he uniquely escaped the human condition to be able to see the truth compared with everybody else who's entrapped in the illusion. But that's not my point right here. My point's to emphasize how compelling this movement of modern, late modern, and postmodern thought has been in systematically dethroning and decentering the human being. And a radical disorientation, a metaphysical and cosmological disorientation is at work here. As a consequence, Nietzsche is where I started to go a second ago. Nietzsche is the guy who grasps it first, I think, fully. 19th century, he's got it by the early 1880s. And in those eloquent words, who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon, like the horizon of being? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Let me get the whole quote. Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night closing in on us? So he's got all the pathos of him. He's carrying the romantic. He's got the whole picture. I mean, he's connected to the primal Dionysian in ways that I'll mention later. He's coming out of the whole. He was a devout Lutheran child and a Christian, and then went through his skeptical awakening, particularly through Schopenhauer and, well, really his own process in many ways. But he's carrying modern science, and at the same time he's seeing through it, and he's recognizing, wait a minute, like there are no facts, there's only interpretations. And what were we doing when we unchained, when he says, who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? It's the horizon of meaning itself that was holding our civilization together for 1,000 years or more, 2,500 years from his perspective, because he's basically going for both the Greeks and the Hebrews, Christian, everything that constitutes the moral superstructure and underpinnings of Western civilization. That's what he's seeing has been undercut. It's like he suddenly is recognizing, hey, there's nothing holding this up. And we have to be willing to be an icy star. We have to be willing to be a star, a lone star, thrown out into the icy solitude of space, of vast, cold space. We have to be willing to do that. And he called on everybody who was willing to go down. Those are his words, to go down like the sun, to do the sunset, to do the descent into the underworld, into the deep unconscious, into the unknown, in order to discover a deeper meaning than was heretofore possible. I think when I said the other a little while ago that I gave a talk that let me see if I've got that here. I gave a talk a few months ago called Like a Rolling Stone, that was kind of capturing this moment of how does it feel to be on your own. This Dylan was basically over and over again. He said, "Whoops. How does it feel?" Like he says, like, how does it feel to be on your own with no direction home, like a rolling stone? It's placed in the the New York social counterculture environment, but he's like, he's an angel of the descent. He's an angel of the ego death that the modern self is undergoing. And part of this radical disorientation is this metaphysical disorientation, and this alienation brings about, when you have an erasing of the horizon of meaning that's holding you, your identity is not just shifted, it's destabilized. And Kohut has talked about like when you no longer have that sort of sense of psychological and moral space that contains you, that is a frame of reference that you orient your life according to. People who undergo that kind of a full encounter with that psychological disorientation actually lose physical stability. It's like there can be an actual kind of destabilization of their ability to stay securely physically stable. I ask you to just think about maybe a time that something so astonishing and so negative happened to you that so pulled the rug out from under your assumptions about what you assumed about what you imagined to be true. That it's like that. You even if you don't like, wait a minute, I have to sit down. Like literally, people say, like, I've got to sit down to take this in. The encounter with death, the encounter of learning that somebody very dear to you is going to die, the metaphysical astonishment of the rug being pulled out from under one that happens in non-ordinary states of consciousness. Could be a spiritual crisis, emergency, could be an acid trip. Just suddenly, it can be hard to stand. Like that disorientation is global. It's a global gestalt. That's carried in a very kind of characteristic postmodern song that Tom Petty did years ago, which you'll recognize. See, he's free, the autonomous modern self, and he's falling. And it's like a perfect sort of, one of the things that's great about that song is it carries perfectly the ambiguity. He's still celebrating the freedom that he's got, the isolated male ego, the wanderer, on his way through life, no commitments, no relationships that and he's falling. He's got them both going. He's free falling. He's perfectly capturing that ambiguity that, in a way, is in Nietzsche as well. So when we're looking at this huge kind of dethronement, this descent, this movement down into the depths. Well, here's that sheet that I was looking for before, but we're past that. I'm not just. I mentioned if we are placing the people who played the role in this, it's you could say it's. Darwin, by placing us into. Well, I mentioned already Copernicus, Darwin, Freud. But it's Virginia Woolf. It's undermining the patriarchal assumption males are magnified, as you put it in A Room of One's Own, males are magnified to a huge, larger dimensions than they are by the female support system that it's being given to them. That it's like it's a delusion of that inflates that whole brilliant essay. It was originally a talk called "A Room of One's Own," is really worth reading right to the end, where she has a beautiful conjunctio of the sacred marriage that is at work in every true artist. She says, if you're just a man or if you're just a woman, you cannot make great art. You have to carry both. And otherwise, it might be good. It might be great for a second, but it'll wither on the vine. And the true artist, when they've experienced that conjunctio and the creative event takes place in their psyche, it's like they draw the curtain closed for the privacy of that event to take place in sort of like sacred enclosure. So philosophically, it's Kant, well, Hume already, as you would have read, but Kant, and then Thomas Kuhn and Keller and so forth. It's the depth psychologists, Freud and Jung and Melanie Klein, and it's the anthropologists, it's the neuroscientists, the astronomers, the astrophysicists, the evolutionary biologists, the huge recognition that somebody like Stephen Jay Gould brings in when he says there's still a kind of, in Darwinian thought in the 19th century, early 20th century, there's still a kind of, we're the crown of creation sense of superiority that is in the, we're the fittest, right? We're the survival of the fittest, and we've got the most complex brain, and et cetera, et cetera. There's still that sense of self-confidence and inflation at work in the modern sensibility that is grounded in an apparent reading of the Darwinian Bible. And what Stephen Jay Gould points out is, if you look at the actual history of biological evolution, and you look at the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction in 65 million years ago, and the dinosaur probably caused by an asteroid or something enormous like that, and the dinosaurs, which from from like basically 230 million years ago to 65 million, so way over 100 million years. I mean, we've only been around for like 200,000 years. For hundreds, scores of millions of years, the dinosaurs ruled the earth, and then they're gone. And reptiles were far more dominant. And what wiped them out wasn't Homo sapiens' superior fitness. It was a total external random event that knocked, and then we're suddenly, then mammals can start developing, but it's not the result of being like just sheer crown of creation. It's or survival of the fittest. It's survival of the lucky, in many respects. So all of this is working towards dethroning that kind of residue of the axial and modern confidence in the unique superiority and separation of the human being from the whole and from nature and from the cosmos. I've emphasized here the implosion in this, by these arrows, the implosion of disenchantment, but there's also a kind of explosion of interpretive pluralism and relativism, because once you start recognizing that there's a multiplicity of defensible assumptions and principles through which you can see the world. And the way we think the world is real is shaped by usually unconscious structures of our own subjectivity and society, language, gender, race, biological factors, biographical factors, etc. Then that suddenly makes all this a big question mark, not a, objective truth that we know what is real. So that also serves the dethronement and disorientation. But accompanying all these is also all these positive dimensions that come out of the dethronement and the descent. The descent into the opening up to the fact that there's more than one truth. The fact, like the opening up to pluralism, to multicultural dignity, to the overcoming of the patriarchal prison, the overcoming of the anthropic megalomania, the overcoming of the conscious ego's delusion that it really knows what's happening and it's on top of the situation and it knows why it is doing things. Okay, that's, Freud and Jung and depth psychology basically opens up like, wow, I thought I was doing things because of this, and then you suddenly discover as you do deep inner work and so forth, and you find these memories, these repressed constellations of trauma, of factors that could be ancestral, familial, that are shaping what we think we are consciously deciding to do out of our freedom. In all these ways, it opens up a kind of humility and a movement into, let's call it, a dialogical relationship to the whole. Dialogical with the unconscious, with the larger psyche inside us, but a dialogue with the anima mundi, a dialogue with other cultures, a dialogue with each other, a dialogue between genders, between different sexual orientations, different religions, different views of reality itself. And that's why I think there's a kind of, even the disenchanted scientists who are forwarding this dethronement with a kind of, part of it is a delight in jamming down the throat of the religious or the fundamentalist, their higher truth. Part of it is a certain amount of Schadenfreude. Part of it also is a kind of sharing of misery, like if I'm isolated and absurd, then I want you to really get it. That's why there's such force in, how do you feel? This is the way it really is. But it's also, I think, serving a kind of noble impulse that's part of the initiatory process of descending. It's part of the necessary pulling out of the rug from underneath the old confident naivete of the modern progress, Eurocentric, patriarchal, rational, so that it can go through the ego death that is necessary for coming into a relationship to the whole that is authentically dialogical and perhaps even reverential. I want to now show a little film clip and this is a remarkable little, just like 2 minutes long. It's basically a trailer for a documentary called The City Dark. It's called The City Dark, and it was replayed on some public stations this summer, but it's not that well known, though it deserves to be better known. But this, with remarkable gentleness and compression, this little film clip or video clip captures a certain fundamental cosmological and psychological condition that we find ourselves in that I think we can all relate to, but it does it with great discernment.
The twinkling of cities at night always says to me, look at us as a species. This is what we do.
What's happened over my lifetime is that you have a kind of sprawl with city lights spilling out into the surrounding regions.
Our society is kind of taking over the wilderness, but it's happening slowly and no one really notices it.
When we add light to the environment, it's an alteration of habitat.
Our society is moving more and more towards a 24/7 lifestyle, and we don't really understand what the long-term health consequences are.
I've seen twice the Milky Way in New York when there's a blackout.
It's so sad because I know what's above me. Once it gets dark here, it just doesn't get dark anymore.
Most human routines make no reference to the cosmos at all. So you might say, well, why do you need it?
If our civilization didn't see the stars and didn't see how big the universe was, would they come to believe that they're more important in this much tinier universe because that's all they see?
I worry that our lack of contact with the sky is doing something to us that's very subtle. Who knows what the ultimate effect will be?
Sorry, we couldn't get better audio for some reason. This thing's not working right, but Chad managed to at least amp it up enough so we could hear the words. Heidegger said, the mortal has turned night into day, and has turned day into a state of harassed unrest. Okay, see how that captures like the solar one-sidedness of our civilization, going back to let there be light, and the identification with the sun and the modern Enlightenment, and really what electricity is, and our cities are, which she said well at the beginning, like there's something beautiful about those twinkling lights, and it's our home, and it kind of represents our capacity to control our fate, but create comfort, etc. But if there's one thing that the postmodern has brought to the modern, is a recognition of the unintended consequences of modernity, and those consequences range from that kind of eclipse of the night sky, of not being able to see the many stars, the deep space, and in a way getting locked into the light of common day. Remember Wordsworth? The light of common day. We all sense, even perhaps especially astronomers, that numinosity exists in the heavens. I mean, virtually every astronaut has come back going, whoa, you wouldn't believe, I had a mystical experience when I was in space. And when they were out especially if they were outside of the capsule and were, looking at the Earth and the rest of space, stars, the galaxies. we all have a sense of that numinosity, also of the transcendence of this, our human life, by something that's much, much greater. Also by modes of temporal unfolding that far transcend the clock that we have are running our days and nights with in the mechanistic way in the modern period. And they gently hint at, like, what happens if we're not conscious, if we never see the stars at night, if we never see the big picture, if we come to think that the only game in town is human urban civilization, and what's really important to us is only that, what does that do? What are going to be the long-term effects of it? Even beyond the ecological, which they certainly refer to, but there's a psychological, cosmological delusion of that comes from living in that hyper solar eternal day that modernity has attempted to create, which is perfectly equivalent to the modern attempt to always be on the ascent, like growth, economic development. It's always onward and upward. It's always upward. It's an identification with the sun in its upward movement to the high noon, the highest position, the heroic apotheosis, the God's eye level. And what it's not taking into account, as we'll explore next time we're together, is that the sun has to go down, and in reality, and in the myths, in our own psyche, in our own lives. And this translates to right into the most concrete forms of, like, how does our society deal with death? I mean, we are bankrupting, and we're bankrupting the United States economy, I mean, partly through the wars and the unbelievable military-industrial complex, but also through an enormous effort to stave off death at any, and to deny death, and to do what are called heroic measures to stop the inevitable from happening, because there's no trust in the bigger cosmic death and rebirth of all things. There's no sense of grounding in the deep archetypal cycles of existence, because we're so locked into a narrow identity of this life, this present moment, this ego, this body. If this goes, everything's going to go. And so there's that denial of death is, and tremendous amounts of money going to heroic medical procedures in the hospitals, and that money that even after, there's no life that is most people, including the person themselves, would consider worth living, in just artificially keeping them alive out of this unconscious fear of death, and money that could be helping babies and children live better, etc. So there's very concrete consequences to this image of the city dark that was carried there. And what we're also seeing, and this is one of the great things about the descent into the postmodern, is that it's a descent into the shadow. Nietzsche was so revealing of the shadow side of human motivation. And book after book, he was just like, this is what's really going on. It's the will to power. It's not this deluded or hypocritical motivation. He's basically bringing a kind of Darwinian biological realpolitik to understanding the human. And Freud did the same thing. I mean, what's really running the show is the id. And if you look at politics and economics today, certainly there is a tremendous amount of will to power basically running the show. And if you look at what's driving the whole modern juggernaut of our worldview, it's disenchantment can in many ways, that is, cosmological disenchantment and disenchantment of nature and of the earth, can be seen as essentially being a projection of the modern self's will to power, its own shadow projected out there. Because, what's mechanistic, we're machines. Machines are human constructs. There's no machines in nature. This is Rupert Sheldrake's point. There's no machines in a state of nature, but we project our own image model of the machine onto the whole cosmos and onto nature, onto animals, on machines, the Cartesian move. And that mechanistic, that helps us recognize one of the great noble dimensions of the postmodern, which is a systematic effort to disclose the deeper motivations that are at work and to be willing to bravely recognize our own shadow. So Nietzsche does it in a certain way, Freud does it, and then Jung thematizes it. He gives it a name, the shadow. And if you look at what's happening with our, like take films, in many ways, one film after another in the last, even just take somebody like Steven Spielberg with films like Saving Private Ryan and the Schindler's List, or the film about slavery, Amarcord. What's that? Thank you. Yeah, he's one example of it, but right across the board, there's been a wholesale willingness to and drive towards, like, revealing what is the shadow behind colonialism, behind white supremacy, behind patriarchy, behind Eurocentrism. And never before has the shadow of, let's say, the churches, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Islam, of religion itself, of the human species itself, that everywhere it goes, it eliminates other species. This huge, huge shadow that's been going on ever since, certainly, the Neanderthals, who we used to mate with. We now know is another part of the dethronement, is recognizing, oh yeah, in every one of our genes here, we have part of our genetic inheritance as Neanderthal, about 4%. But wherever we went, species died, including every other human species, or para-human species, if we identify Homo sapiens as being us. So that's what this is Jung's great point when he said there's two great tasks of psychological development. He says if the apprentice piece of psychological development is to encounter the shadow, the masterpiece is to encounter the anima. And if we write that large, and this is somebody, by the way, Jung is somebody who even pointed to the shadow of God in Answer to Job, and the shadow of that dimension of existence, of evil. He said, so the shadow, if we extrapolate from what he was talking about was the individual psyche, and particularly he's focused on the male psyche with its anima counterpart. But if we recognize how this at the collective level, which has been patrilineal in its dominant worldview and executive ego functions, then I think we have to say the shadow is something that we're, in all these different ways we're encountering, but the anima is really the anima mundi, It's the soul of the world. It's the whole. It's not just the contrasexual soul of the male ego. It's the anima mundi is the ensouled world that has been systematically disenchanted, which permits objectification and exploitation, and a capacity for intellectual and technological dominance that is like it gives that whole process of differentiation that it puts us on steroids. It puts disenchantment on steroids with its power in changing the earth, so that, as Brian Swim says, our consciousness and the way we symbolically make sense of the world, symbolic consciousness, has now become a geological force. We could also say a biological force too. It's melting the polar ice caps. It's eliminating coral reefs the size of mountains. It's raising sea levels. It's wiping out species, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Depleting the soil. So this facing of the shadow, and then combined with the reconnection to the whole, the anima mundi, and this is where we'll get into this more next week when you'll read the epilogue for this week. Your shortest, or I guess it's 2 weeks from now that we meet. This is your shortest reading assignment. We get these intimations, for example, of meaning and purpose that transcend the human. We also get not just this single isolated. We start to move into a dialogical relationship to others. So there's multiple centers. There's multiple cells. There's multiple centers and cells and religious, metaphysical orientations inside each of us. We're all walking around as, containing multitudes. So, but with synchronicities and Jung's recognition that meaning is not just a human psychological construct, but is carried by nature itself, which is a point of view that is affirmed by many other, in many other disciplines and perspectives as well in our time. This is all moving to that encounter with the anima mundi, but not just a recovery of the anima mundi. This is a spiral, so that it's like because nothing's ever lost, and the whole differentiation hasn't been just like this big epistemological evolutionary error. We're part of the whole. The whole's been constellating something here, and it's as if we're moving into a new relationship with the whole. But that's for next week. In this, or 2 weeks from now, my point right now is I'm wanting to emphasize that while the postmodern, the late modern and the postmodern brings about this radical, multi-pronged dethronement, decentering, disenchantment, descent, all those D words. D is, it's like it's the Latin for down, negating, going down, and it's a noble impulse that is at work even when it's unconsciously being acted upon by its protagonists. And one of the crucial things about postmodernity is that the critical individual consciousness, the critical intelligence that was so carefully forged by this long process and reaches such a seeming robust peak in the high noon of modernity, it just keeps developing, getting stronger and stronger, so that act of reflexivity, of self-awareness and of judging oneself, seeing oneself, commenting on what, recognizing and discerning what are what's really going on in here? What am I projecting? That has a bracingly life-enhancing potential for overcoming inflation and megalomania and anthropocentric, in the negative sense, and egocentric delusion of self-reference and so forth. That it provides that irony that allows us to not be carried away by any one interpretation of reality as being reality itself. That's the great liberation of postmodernity, is to recognize the interpretive relativity and plurality, and therefore responsibility, self-responsibility in how we engage the world, what assumptions we are consciously and unconsciously approaching the world with is going to play a crucial role in constellating that world. And at first that can be a pretty unnerving destabilization. Like, you mean I can't know for sure and nail down exactly what's absolutely true and build everything on that absolutely solid rock? But that can be that free-falling disorientation. But it also can be a kind of fortifying, it can lend itself to a kind of fortifying sense of joyful courage in embracing our role in responsibly co-creating the cosmos and our lives that we are a participant in, that we are a participatory expression of the cosmos. We're not in it, we're not placed into it, we're not external to it, outside of it, against it. We are the cosmos, but in some sense the cosmos has differentiated us, and we've differentiated ourselves in this, interesting recursive way, so that the potential for a partnership and an authentic I-thou relationship versus an I-it relationship to the whole could emerge. I want to end now with a great 3-minute, very funny, brilliant clip from John Cleese, who, right in this room a few years ago, he and I taught a course on the comic genius. And right around that time, he made this little skit, as it were, called The Scientist, in which he perfectly reflects the postmodern ironic and humorous, like that's part of irony, right, is that capacity to laugh and to see the humor, that's the trickster element, in not only kind of recognizing the consequences of the postmodern descent and the Thomas Kuhn and modern philosophy of science's recontextualizing of the scientific reductionist worldview, but he also ingeniously makes reference to the fundamentalist. He's basically taking on both fundamentalist science as well as fundamentalist religion with a kind of postmodern playfulness that is perhaps a good note to end our time with you today. Sure. Why don't we do that before we play this? And I realize we'll have a lot of time next time for questions too. But I wanted to. I didn't know for sure that I was going to go all the way to this point. But please.
Okay, so the test is in 2 weeks. We're having a short test. Is that what you said?
Yes, a short test if you, what's in the notes? Oh, the test material. Yeah, well, it would be basically, if you've been here for the lectures and if you read the one book, that's all that you will need to ace this test. And you don't even have to ace it. You're just doing a pass-fail. So this, and the way the test is going to be is that if there is any particular answer that you give to one of these questions, which some of them will just be kind of true, false. There won't be a lot. I don't want to waste a lot of time with the test, but there'll be just enough to, give you a sense of displaying your presence in the class. But if there's anything that after you've turned it in, you feel like, oh, I wish I had done better on that, or upon further reflection later, you say, I really wish I had done better on that one, then that can be the topic for your 2 to 3 page essay, where you basically do a more, a brief but elaborated version of responding to any one of those questions. Or it could be something else, but that would be a way of compensating for the particular blind spot that might have come up right while you're taking the test. Did I give a date in there? Okay. If you, let's see, I think. If you could, when does the school reopen?
Grades are due January 14th.
And when does the school reopen, physically? Does anybody know? No, that's when classes reconvene, but staff will be here and stuff earlier. Let's see, the last class, December 15th. For those of you who can get it into me by, let's say, by the end of the year, December 31st, that would be great. And for anybody who's still struggling, which I can't remember, this is a 1-unit class, it's like no big thing, then just get it to me by the 7th of January, either if you, or whenever is the opening date that the school's open, where you can drop it off or it can come in by mail. If you want to send, I kind of like being able to read things in hard copy, but if you want to send it in by email, then just do to our Tarnas@ciis.edu. Okay, so that's basically the assignment, weighty as it is. All right, so this is John Cleese, the scientist. I think it was 2007, I think, is when he recorded it just down here in Santa Barbara in his own backyard. Well, I hope that the volume is good enough with the sound. We'll see.
Hello. We scientists have now located a gene which we scientists believe gives people the need to believe in God. In other words, this God gene releases chemicals into our body which create the impression that there is meaning in the universe. And this God gene is just here, between the gene which we scientists now know makes us eat coconut ice cream after a fish dinner, and this gene here, which causes people with weak egos to grasp around desperately for simple explanations. Now, the discovery of this God gene is a big step forward in our quest to show that every bit of human behavior can be explained away mechanically, because we've now also located the gene which makes some people believe that every piece of human behavior can be explained away mechanically. And it's here, right next to the gene that makes you go to see Nicolas Cage movies, so that's another puzzle solved. And right under this gene, which can cause you to forget that since the 1920s, quantum physics has destroyed forever the idea that everything can be explained mechanically. Now, the gene which causes us to forget this obvious fact is very dominant in some people, especially me. And we scientists now know that it's closely linked to this gene here, which gives you such a weak sense of self that you hang on to anything that makes you feel more secure emotionally, whether it's fundamentalist religion or a reductionist view of the universe, which is right over this gene here that makes you want to punch people in the head when they take the scientific process and subject it to their pathological literal-mindedness. Thank you. I needed that. And by the way, we now know that there is a gene that causes you to say, thank you, I needed that, just there, when you were punched in the head.
Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you, John, please. All right, so I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bring your questions, discussion points that you would like for us all to address, and I look forward to seeing you then. And read the epilogue to Passion of the Western Mind. It's only 30 pages.